In the frozen shadows of the Bitterroot wilderness, the line between a survivor and a statistic is as thin as a firing pin. One moment, you're flying over the jagged spine of Idaho. The next, you're crawling through a graveyard of aluminum and ice, clutching a promise to a dying family. This isn't a Sunday stroll in the woods. It is a brutal, high-stakes gamble against a mountain that wants you dead. With a broken body and a heart fueled by pure desperation, you have nothing to rely on but the cold steel in your hands, a legendary Winchester Model 70, and a battle-worn Mossberg 500, heirlooms of an era when men were made of tougher stuff. Can you clear a frozen chamber while a 400-pound boar is mid-charge? Can your nerves hold steady enough to drop a gray ghost at 300 yards in the fading moonlight? Or will the high lonesome claim your name before the first rescue bird even leaves the tarmac? Welcome to Gun Story. If you're ready to witness the true grit of the American spirit, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is the fuel that keeps these stories of heritage and survival alive. Check your headspace. Mind your backstop. The hunt for salvation begins now. The wind screamed through the shattered cockpit of the Cessna 206 like a banshee mourning the dead. We were somewhere over the jagged spine of the Bitterroot wilderness, a place the old-timers call the High Lonesome, where the earth reaches up to scrape the sky, and the cold doesn't just bite, it hollows you out. I pulled myself from the wreckage, my ribs burning with every breath, and looked at the faces of my family. My wife Sarah was pinned under a buckle seat, her breathing a wet, ragged rattle, and my son Cody lay motionless, his forehead split by the instrument panel. The smell of high-octane avgas was thick in the air, a terrifying reminder that our sanctuary could become a funeral pyre at any second. I reached into the emergency bag and pulled out the orange plastic Orion flare gun. It felt like a toy in my trembling hand, a pathetic defense against the vast, gray indifference of the Idaho mountains. I stepped into the waist-deep snow and fired. The red spark climbed into the low-hanging clouds, hung for a desperate heartbeat, and then vanished into the mist without an answer. There was no one coming. The silence that followed was heavier than the crash itself. I looked back at the cockpit, at the blood on the upholstery, and knew that if I stayed here, I was just waiting for the cold to finish what the gravity started. I leaned in, kissed Sarah's cold cheek, and whispered a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I told her I would find help or die trying. With nothing but a buck knife and a heart full of shadows, I turned my back on the wreckage and began to climb toward the northern ridge, praying the good Lord still had an eye on this godforsaken stretch of granite. The climb was a slow, grinding torture that stripped the heat from my bones and replaced it with the cold iron of desperation. My boots crunched through a frozen crust of snow that gave way with every step, sending me plunging hip-deep into the white powder of a mountain that didn't want me there. 3 hours into the trek, the light began to fail, turning the Douglas firs into jagged silhouettes against a bruised purple sky. I crested a ridge and saw it. A derelict fire lookout cabin, its timber grayed by decades of high-altitude sun, and its porch sagging like a broken jaw. I smashed the frozen padlock with a granite stone and stumbled inside, hoping for a radio, a phone, or even a flare. The interior smelled of mountain dust and ancient pine resin. The radio on the desk was a gutted carcass of wires, and the satellite phone was a useless brick of plastic with a cracked screen. My heart sank into my gut, a heavy stone of failure, until my boot caught on a loose floorboard near the wood stove. Beneath the rot, wrapped in heavy, oil-soaked wool, I found the only salvation the wilderness had left for me. I pulled back the cloth to reveal a pre-64 Winchester Model 70, the legendary rifleman's rifle, chambered in the venerable 3006 Springfield. Beside it lay a Mossberg 500 Persuader with a 20-inch barrel, its bluing worn, but its action as slick as glass. I checked the Winchester first, cycling the bolt to feel the controlled round feed, grab a dusty casing from the magazine with mechanical perfection. The glass was an old loopholed Vi X3, fixed firm in its mounts, still holding the zero set by some ranger long since gone to his maker. I found a box of 180-grain Nosler partition rounds and a handful of 3-inch Magnum double-aught buckshot sitting in a tin can on the mantel. These weren't just guns. They were the tools of a man who understood that in the backcountry, your life is only as certain as your equipment. I loaded the Winchester, feeling the crisp snap of the floor plate, and slung it over my shoulder. The Mossberg went into my hands, its tang safety under my thumb, a heavy weight of steel that whispered a single word: survive. I didn't have much time before the night predators realized there was a wounded man walking their halls. The descent into the timberline was a journey into a primal darkness where every shadow seemed to breathe, and the wind carried the scent of wet fur and old blood. I was crossing a narrow ravine choked with fallen cedar when the mountain itself seemed to roar. From a thicket of scrub oak, a mountain boar, a nightmare of 400 pounds of muscle and gristle, exploded into the clearing. This wasn't a game of sport, it was a head-on collision. I didn't have the seconds required to find the crosshairs of the Leupold on the Winchester. So I let the rifle drop to its sling and ripped the Mossberg 500 to my shoulder in one fluid motion, born of 1,000 hunts with my father. The tang's safety clicked off with a metallic snap that was lost in the beast grunt. I pulled the trigger and the 3-inch Magnum buckshot roared into the twilight, the recoil slamming into my bruised shoulder like a hammer blow. The first blast shredded the boar's left ear and plowed into his heavy neck, but his moxie was absolute. He didn't even flinch. I pumped the Forn, that unmistakable clack-clack echoing off the canyon walls, and delivered a second load of lead into his chest as he closed the distance. He skidded in the slush, his tusks missing my thigh by inches, and I didn't stop until the chamber was empty and the snow was stained a deep, steaming crimson. I stood there shivering, on the smell of burnt cordite mixing with the copper tang of blood, but I couldn't rest. The shot had been a dinner bell for the gray ghosts of the Bitterroot. By the time I reached the high ridge, I saw them, a pack of wolves, lean and silver in the rising moon, shadowing my movement from the edge of the tree line 300 yards out. They knew I was hurt, and they knew I was alone. I sat against a lightning-scarred pine, the Winchester Model 70 across my knees, and felt the 3.5-pound trigger pull. It was crisp, no creep, a masterpiece of American steel. I dialed the optic to 6 power and watched the alpha male step into a patch of moonlight. I breathed out, held for a slight crosswind, and squeezed. The 3006 barked, a thunderous crack that announced my presence to the entire valley. And the 180-grain Nosler partition did exactly what it was designed to do since 1948. The wolf dropped where he stood, and the rest of the pack vanished into the shadows like smoke in a gale. I was still alive, and I still had 3 rounds left in the magazine for whatever lay over the next peak. The blizzard descended like a wall of white static, swallowing every landmark and turning the world into a freezing void. I could feel the glacial air clawing through my torn jacket, biting into my skin like 1,000 poisoned needles. As I clawed my way up a sheer granite scree slope toward the relay station, the earth beneath my boots gave way. A localized slab avalanche, heavy and sudden, swept me 30 feet down a jagged ravine. I woke in a tomb of silence, buried waist-deep in suffocating powder, with the Winchester Model 70 thrown 10 yards out of reach, its barrel buried deep in the drift. A white-hot spike of agony shot from my wrenched left ankle, threatening to pull me into blackness, but a low, guttural snarl from behind the limestone boulders snapped my survival instinct back to life. 2 of the pack's stragglers, the most relentless of the gray ghosts, had tracked my scent of blood through the storm. I couldn't reach the rifle, and the Mossberg 500's action was choked solid with wind-driven ice and grit. In that heartbeat of absolute mortality, I had to use my frozen, bloodless fingers to claw at the receiver, gouging out the packed ice from the ejection port. The lead wolf leaped, a gray blur of muscle and prehistoric hunger, launching through the air, with eyes like dying coals. Sure, I roared a defiance I didn't know I had left, slammed the shotgun's buttstock against a rock to break the ice lock on the slide, and swung the muzzle up just as the beast's jaws snapped inches from my throat. The roar of the Magnum buckshot shattered the white silence. The muzzle flash, a momentary sun that scorched the falling snow and sent the predator tumbling into the abyss. Using the empty Mossberg as a crutch, I began to crawl, dragging my broken body through the howling gale, the copper taste of my own blood, the only thing keeping me focused on the promise I made back at the wreckage of the Cessna. The first light of dawn was a thin, bleeding line of gray over the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Range as I reached the highest summit of the northern ridge. My breath came in ragged plumes of frost. No, and every joint in my body felt as though it had been filled with ground glass. But the sight before me was a vision of salvation. Perched on a granite shelf was an old forestry relay station, its steel antenna tower bowing slightly under the weight of a decade of ice but still standing tall against the sky. I staggered toward the small concrete bunker at its base, my hand gripping the cold walnut stock of the Winchester Model 70 like a talisman. I kicked the door open and found a world preserved in amber, a dusty desk, a topographical map of the Idaho Panhandle, and a heavy olive-drab emergency radio unit that looked like it had seen service in Korea. I threw the power switch and held my breath, listening to the hum of vacuum tubes warming up, a low electric drone that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I keyed the heavy mic and spoke into the static, my voice a gravelly rasp that barely sounded like my own. Mayday, mayday, this is a downed civilian aircraft in the Bitterroot wilderness. Survivors at the crash site, 1 mile south of the Ranger Lookout. I repeated the coordinates 3 times until a voice crackled back through the white noise. A calm, professional tone from a world that felt 1,000 years away. We copy you, climber. Hold your position. Birds are in the air. I slumped against the wall, the Mossberg 500 leaning beside me and the Winchester across my lap. I looked out the small, reinforced window as the sun finally crested the mountains, bathing the wilderness in a golden light that made the snow look like crushed diamonds. I had survived the boar, the wolves, and the mountain itself. But I knew it wasn't just my own grit that had carried me here. It was the reliability of American steel, the heritage of men who built things to last, and the quiet strength that comes when a father is the only thing standing between his family and the dark. 2 hours later, the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades broke the silence of the High Lonesome. As the Black Hawk dropped its winch through the mist, I took one last look at the old rifles. They had done their duty, holding zero and never failing when the stakes were life and death. I left them there in the cabin for the next man who might find himself at the mercy of the peaks, a silent promise that as long as a man is prepared, he is never truly beaten.